The sun blazed high in the Ethiopian sky. It was early June, and the cracked earth beneath her feet seemed to snap with every step. The wind was dry, dragging dust across the dirt roads, but there was no sign of a storm. Everything seemed at peace. Everything, silently ordinary. In the middle of that vast, arid landscape, a girl was walking. Small, fragile at first glance, but with eyes that knew the path well. She carried her notebooks pressed to her chest, holding her dreams close with both arms, as if protecting something precious. She walked alone, as she had so many times before. The school wasn't nearby, but it mattered. And she knew that. The road wound between scattered fields and twisted trees. The sound of her footsteps was the only thing echoing. No laughter, no engines, no rush. Just the steady rhythm of sand beneath the feet of someone who, that morning, had no idea the world was about to change. It was there, on that forgotten stretch of the map, that routine broke. A sudden movement in the brush. Presences appearing where there had been only emptiness. Shadow blocking the sun. The calm was swallowed by the unexpected. And what had once been a safe path, became a dead end. She disappeared. For days, no one knew where she was. As if the wind had taken her. As if the earth had chosen to hide her. A 12-year-old girl. Alone. Missing in the Ethiopian countryside. But the story doesn't end there. Because deep in the forest, someone, or something, was waiting. 3 lions. Silent. Massive. Watchful. What would you do if you were taken from the world, and saved by something that doesn't speak your language? She lived in a small village in southern Ethiopia, where time seemed to flow more slowly, and the land knew how to keep ancient secrets. It was a simple place, made of mud, straw, and hope. Mornings began early with the crowing of roosters, and the days unfolded in an ancestral rhythm of harvest, water, and silence. In that land marked by the power of the sun and the wisdom of elders, going to school was a rare privilege, especially for girls. Most of them grew up learning domestic tasks, preparing for a fate already decided, often before they even understood their own names. But this girl was different. Every morning, she would tie her notebooks with a worn-out piece of cloth, pull her hair back with a simple knot, and walk alone down the dirt road toward the nearest school. It was far. And not always safe. But she went anyway. She carried the look of someone who didn't just dream of a future, but of change. She dreamed of becoming a teacher. Of teaching other girls like her. Of changing the silent course of what seemed already written. And even at just 12 years old, she walked with the strength of someone who knows that resistance, in itself, is an act of courage. But that morning, something was different. The wind felt drier. The sky, paler. And there was a restlessness in the air, as if the world itself hesitated to go on. That morning, she left home as always. Gave a shy wave goodbye. And followed the same path she took every day. But she never came back. And in the silence that followed, something broke, not just in her village, but in the land itself. As if nature, witnessing the injustice, had chosen to intervene. Silently, and wildly. It happened as quickly as it was brutal. For men emerged from the brush like dense shadows, breaking the solitude of the road with silent violence. There was no time to run, no time to scream. Only the muffled sound of dirt being scraped by feet desperate to escape, and then, the deep silence of the trees that bore silent witness to it all. The thick forest swallowed the girl, and with her, her immediate future. She vanished from the known world. From the map. From existence itself. She was taken far away, so far that even the wind from her village couldn't reach her. The men didn't want money. Nor revenge. Their purpose was something else, to force her into a marriage she had never asked for, like so many other girls her age. It was an old, quiet practice that still persisted in many corners of the country. And there, deep in the woods, they planned to make her just another among countless others who were never heard. There, among dry trunks and crushed leaves, they built a makeshift hut. Intertwined branches, worn tarps, just enough to keep someone invisible. The place smelled of abandonment. It was damp, dark, and filled with a thick air, as if even the forest itself disapproved of what was happening there. She was kept under constant watch. The men's eyes never left her. There was fear in her every move, not just of what they might do, but of how long it might last. She tried to escape. Once, twice. But the forest was too dense. The path, unknown. Every wrong step led back to the same place, the hard floor of the hut, cold stairs, and time that refused to pass. The hours dragged on, shaped by fear and exhaustion. Daylight leaked through the cracks like silent blades, marking the arrival of yet another night, and another, and another. 7 days. 7 days without a face, without a name, without the world. The hideout changed when the kidnapper's own fear grew. News had spread. The police were searching. And they knew they were being closed in on. One late afternoon, before the sun had fully set, the men moved her in haste. A cloth bag thrown over her head. Urgent footsteps. The sound of leaves tearing underfoot. They were fleeing. But not her. The forest felt denser that night. The sky, covered in low clouds, refused to reveal the moon. And somewhere in the darkness, the unexpected was waiting. Because at that very moment, deeper within the forest, someone was approaching. But it wasn't the police. It wasn't people. And it wasn't there by chance. The brush closed in around them. Branches grew thicker, roots rose higher. Every step the men took was a mistake, stumbled, frantic, without direction. They were running from the police, yes, but it felt like they were fleeing something deeper. A premonition. The air was heavy. The forest, suffocating. As if the very ground wanted them gone. And then came the sound. At first, it was soft, like the forest breathing. Then, a dense, rhythmic rustling, something moving with purpose. No birds sang. No insects buzzed. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. The first roar wasn't loud, but it carried an ancient echo. Primal. A sound that didn't need to be understood, because it was felt. The men froze. And then, stepping out from the darkness between the trees, they appeared. 3 lions. Massive. Silent. Like ghosts from another time. The filtered light through the canopy made their eyes glow like burning embers. They didn't run. They didn't roar again. They simply advanced, step by step, as if they owned the right to be there. The men tried to retreat, but their feet found no solid ground. One fell. Another bolted in the wrong direction. A third dissolved into choked screams. And the last, vanished into the foliage. The lions never touched the girl. She lay near a root, her face stained with dust, her hands dirty, her body trembling. But there was no fear in her eyes. Only silence. And a kind of understanding. One of the lions looked directly at her. Amber eyes. Steady. Immense. And in that instant, time folded in on itself. She didn't see a predator. She saw something beyond the animal. It was like standing before an ancient force, something greater than anything she had ever known. A being that carried the weight of the earth and the silence of the sky. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply felt. The wind shifted. The leaves danced. And the lions stayed. The girl, now alone, felt her heart beating like a distant drum. But it was a steady rhythm. Not of fear, but of reverence. And there, in the heart of the forest, between instinct and the impossible, something was sealed. An invisible promise. She would live. And the guardians would remain.
Are you enjoying the story so far? If so, like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more stories like this.
Night fell like a heavy veil over the forest. No moon. No stars. Only thick darkness covering the trees like a silent shroud. The scent of wet earth, of ancient leaves, of living wood. Everything there felt suspended in time. As if the world, out of respect, had chosen not to move forward. The girl sat curled up, knees drawn to her chest. Her breathing was soft, almost soundless. The tears slid down her cheeks without force, as if she no longer cried out of despair, but from sheer exhaustion. Her eyes burned, but they remained open. Watching. And there they were. The 3 lions. None of them roared. None threatened. But also, none of them left. One lay just a few meters away, its heavy body stretched out like a sentinel choosing to rest without ever truly sleeping. The second stood tall, staring into the brush ahead, as if daring anything to come closer. The third moved in wide circles, pacing around the girl, creating an invisible barrier, a line no danger would dare to cross. Time there was not measured in hours. It was measured in heartbeats, in whispers of wind, in the rustle of leaves. The forest spoke its own language. And in that language, the lions were the guardians of life. She whispered prayers. Fragmented words she had learned as a child. Words that usually meant little, but that night seemed to mean everything. The world gave no reply. No human voice echoed among the trees. The only answer was silence. And that silence was alive. It was presence. It was protection. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Not out of safety, but surrender. The fear was still there, yes. But now it was mingled with something she couldn't name. A sense that, even without understanding, even without explanation, she was safe. The hours passed unnoticed. The cold crept in slowly, crawling across the forest floor. But she wasn't alone. The lions were still there. Breathing with her. Keeping watch with her. As if obeying a command that came not from the forest. Nor from the sky, but from something that lives between the two. And in that night that seemed never-ending, she was kept alive by the vigil of 3 wild hearts. 3 hearts that beat not just out of instinct, but for a reason no human being could ever truly comprehend. It was at dawn the next day that the voices began to draw near. Faint at first, as if coming from far away. Careful footsteps pressing into damp leaves, the muffled sound of branches being pushed aside, a radio crackling with an unstable signal. The police were moving deeper into the forest. They were looking for a girl. Hoping to find clues. A scarf, a trail, maybe a shred of hope. But what they found was the improbable. There, in the center of a narrow clearing, surrounded by roots and light filtered through the green canopy above, she was. Sitting. Eyes open but distant. Her face still dirty, lips cracked, her body still, as if time itself had stopped around her. And around her, standing between shadow and light, were the 3 lions. They didn't roar. They didn't flee. They didn't attack. They simply watched. For a brief moment, their eyes met the uniformed men's, and in that gaze was something impossible to define. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to a farewell. Then, one by one, the lions slowly turned away. None of them ran. None of them hesitated. They walked silently back into the forest, as if crossing an invisible threshold between the world of humans and the world only they could understand. The silence that followed was heavy. Thick. Sacred. The girl was rescued in silence. The officers approached slowly, as if they were still in a place not meant for them. She didn't panic. She didn't scream. She simply let them lift her. Yes, she was in shock. But she was alive. Untouched. Protected. Later, one of the officers, still visibly shaken, would repeat the phrase that spread across Ethiopia. They left her as a gift. No one argued. Because in the face of what they had witnessed, there was no room for explanation. The forest had spoken. And its answer had come, with claws, golden eyes, and a silence that saves. In the days that followed, the story traveled across the country like a breeze carrying something sacred. In the capital, in villages, in farmlands, in classrooms, everyone was talking about the girl and the lions. About the forest. About the unexplainable. Experts were called in. Zoologists, biologists, animal behavior specialists. Some tried to offer explanations. Maybe the girl's crying reminded them of a lion cub's whimper. Maybe the lions had recently eaten and were simply curious. Maybe it was just a coincidence. But none of the theories held up for long. Because that kind of thing simply doesn't happen. In nature, big cats are predators. And humans, especially small, vulnerable ones, are rarely spared in encounters like that. Let alone by a group. Let alone deep in the heart of the forest. And yet, she survived. Not by chance, but under watch. So the questions began to change. They stopped being scientific, and became human. Was it instinct? Was it a miracle? Or was it something we've forgotten how to understand? There was something about that moment that escaped measurement and manuals. Something that spoke of a silent bond between species. An understanding that doesn't need words. An ancient form of communication, perhaps forgotten, but still alive somewhere in a hidden corner of the world. It's possible that in our modern haste, we've lost the ability to sense those connections. To remember that the world doesn't belong to us, but that we share it with forces we can feel, but not explain. Because, in the end, not everything needs to be understood. Some things just happen. And leave a mark no time can erase. Today, she lives in safety. Life has returned, slowly, carefully. The notebooks are back in her hands, her steps back on the road. But there's something in her eyes that isn't the same. Something you can't explain. Something you don't ask about. She continues her studies, just as she dreamed. But she almost never speaks about that week. Not out of fear, but perhaps because some stories aren't meant to be told with words. Some say she was saved by the lions. Others, by God. Maybe by both. And maybe, none of them are wrong. What matters is that she was protected, against all logic, against a reality that, for so many other girls, continues to be silently enforced. As if the wild, for one brief moment, chose to become shelter, not threat. As if the earth looked at her, and decided not to let her go. In the end, this isn't just a story about a girl. It's about the invisible boundary between the natural and the sacred. About what lives in silence, but acts with purpose. Because, not every roar is a threat. And not every forest is solitude. Sometimes, what saves us, comes from the earth. And speaks through the eyes.
If you like the story, share this video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to hear more exciting stories like this.